you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Hello, everybody. This is a subject very dear to my heart. This is about the gender gaps in the implementations of SDGs. We have only 7 years left or less, and it seems that according to the UN itself, no country is on track meeting the goal of gender equality, without which none of the other goals will be met. And in fact, the gap in several of them is growing. These are the words from Antonio Guterres. So it seems that the UN Agenda 2030 is failing women, and women will be left behind. And this is a problem for science, because science is expected to provide the knowledge needed to implement uh, to implement SDGs. So what is the problem? The problem is that 8 SDGs make no mention of women, girls, boys, men, etc. as target for intervention. They might use words like all or universal, but not specifically where the implementations and interventions are needed. So we could say that half of the Agenda 2030 is gender blind. So UN Women, that's their job, is to to produce statistics of where this Agenda 2030 is standing in relations to improving the lives of women. They have identified 125 gender-related indicators, but only for 6 SDGs. And so the SDGs that are very commonly associated with women: poverty, hunger, health, education, empowerment, social inequalities. So in all those contexts, women are presented usually as victims, and not really as also, say, researchers or innovators or entrepreneurs or leaders or decision makers. And this has got a big impact, as I will show, on how people are thinking about implementing SDGs. So the not only thing, even for SDG 5, which is the one that is specifically talking about empowerment and equality for women, even there, only 4 out of 10 countries have data available. So there is a real problem with having sufficient data to understand where the progress is being made on improving the lives of women, even in the SDGs that are kind of have strong associations with women. And this is due to the basically many countries that don't have the capacity, the history, the resources of collecting data. That has never really been considered as an important thing. And the UN Women are working very hard on training different countries on collecting data. The other issue is that the collection of data is done at the country level. So comparisons are even more difficult because in many countries, there would be a different situation, say, for rural women or women in urban areas, and this cannot be captured in the way that SDGs are being monitored. So basically, we know that every SDG has got a gender dimension. After all, it is about social economic development, so it has to be. It is quite natural that there should be inclusion of each of gender considerations when SDGs are analyzed. And indeed, the UN Women have produced a report stating that gender perspective should be integrated into analysis of each SDG. So there are many examples for anybody who has actually understands how gender operates in society. You can read each SDG and see the gender content in it, but it is not represented. It is not spoken about specifically with the way that the SDGs are described. So here's an example, of course, that the SDG 9, which is about industry and innovation and infrastructures, has got no gender indicators or doesn't speak about gender, but even the UN report that looked at infrastructures has decided that actually it is shocking how the specific needs of women and girls are totally ignored. The one SDG that I'm particularly interested in, because we are in a project called Genesis that is examining gendered power relations in energy transition. So SDG 7, which is about improving access to reliable, modern, and affordable energy services, it's pretty much what we are trying to address. And this SDG 7 has got no gender targets or gender indicators, but talks about universal access to affordable, reliable, modern energy. It talks about global energy, increasing the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix, and the doubling the global rate of improvement in energy efficiency. This is really worrying, this focus on global energy mix, because it might skew the way we understand the energy needs and how their renewable energy is implemented in global south compared to the global north. So it is really very interesting for to examine each SDG, and taking a gender perspective helps you recognize um, how unclear they are about what is it that they're going to uh, produce in terms of results at the end. So here, just from the literature, I picked up some examples about energy-related gender issues that people have talked about when they're looking at SDG 7. So gender cost of poor access to electricity has been estimated to equal to 0.5 trillion US dollars. The fact that electricity might be for the first time delivered, connected to a village, it does it not mean actually that women will benefit from it the same way that men, because 5 new electric light bulbs might be installed, but none would be in the kitchen. Or even if the household has got the money to purchase electrical devices, it is the men who decide what kind of devices are needed. And since they don't spend much time inside the house, they don't really prioritize household devices. So this information is available, but it's missing from the way that SDGs are being analyzed. So the question is, why is it that available information is not recognized? And I will want to point out some of those reasons. So there is a monitoring process going on for every SDG, including for SDG 7. But in this case, the tracking is done by using household surveys. And also WHO and World Bank got together to harmonize the survey design. When you look actually on the questions that are included, anything to do with gender, which I think there are about 8 questions, have to do with collection of fuel, what kind of a fuel, what kind of cooking equipment is used, how much time is being spent on collecting fuel, how much time is spent on cooking. There is no reference directly on distinguishing between disaggregating this information by sex, but it does explain why in all the reports that one has on SDGs and energy, there's such a strong focus on collection of fuel, the time that girls and women spend, the time of on inefficient cooking equipment, and so on. It is again not really recognized that women's decision-making roles within the household. So the household surveys are just approximates and not really helpful to understand if women are really benefiting from from the improvements that are being made in energy services. The other issue is that, of course, concentrating on household ignores the fact that women can be heads of the households. It sort of assumes that men are the heads of the household, but also overlooks the fact that it's energy services for the community needs and for the productive use levels of energy. So women do frequently have small businesses, and that's how they need the energy for productive use, but it's not considered, and community needs are not considered in terms of, are they, is the lighting reliable energy available for maternity wards or for roads to be safe and for women to move during the night. So that's really depressing, and we don't really know. Well, no, we do know, and I'm going to show why these things are being ignored. So one can take SDG 7 and try to unpack it from a gender perspective, looked at every phrase. Immediately, the word access strikes us very important, because we have to ask who controls access and how, and what it actually means. What does affordable means? It's a very gendered concept. One can also look at all the other phrases and try and come up with some very interesting research questions and also indicators. But so we have a big gap in knowledge here that disadvantages how women are perceived as recipients of Agenda 2030. So what is done at the side of actually what the science is contributing to this? And many efforts have been made to try to find the best way to analyze SDGs, and there are 5 methods that dominate this efforts. The one is using the linguistic approach, basically, as I already indicated, using it keywords and phrases and trying to interpret them and connect as different SDGs along the different wordings. The other one is the literature approach, basically looking at bibliometric analysis and finding out studies that on SDGs that specifically looked at different SDGs. Very, very common approach is expert judgment. You bring together, say, 150 experts and give them the task of prioritizing different targets and connecting different targets. And that frequently is supported by also some evidence from the literature. And then is the quantitative approach, which are the indicators and statistics. And as I already have shown, there are big gaps in what is available, but ideally it would be the very strong arguments. And there are also efforts to develop a sort of a system level models. None yet specifically exist, but there are some interesting efforts that have been made, and I'm going to show some of them. So science is expected to contribute to the success of Agenda 2030, and when sources are mentioned in the literature, the most important source is the scientific literature. The other one is the sort of official statistics and direct observations, and also some expert judgment. So it is very important then, if that's the way that people are sourcing their evidence for their decisions, on what kind of a SDG implementation is best for particular country or context, it is important to see whether there are gender gaps in the sources of knowledge, and there certainly are big gender gaps in the sources of knowledge. So a study by Elsevier looked at research available for each SDG and found out that for about half of the SDGs, it is less than 10%. And for SDG 7, which is the one on energy, only 1% of studies include considerations of gender issues. Okay, so you can see now that basically, even if the analytical approach says we're going to use expert judgment and findings from literature, it is quite clear that the literature is not going to provide them with the information that they should have. And also, if they don't include gender experts among the uh, uh, community of experts that they have invited, then of course these results are going to be gender blind. And it not only applies to people, it also applies to, of course, to environment. People depend on the environment for the ecosystem services, marine ecosystems, land ecosystems. We have a specific SDGs, SDG 14, which is about their life underwater, SDG 15, which is life on land. And again, the considerations is that if you were thinking about the oceans and sustainability of the oceans, we don't have the knowledge to tell us about the survival, reproduction, and survival of many or nearly all marine species, because only 4% of studies looked at the sex and reproduction of marine species. And the problem here is that climate change impacts on quality of water by changing pH, by changing temperature, and that affects how marine species reproduce. So in some situation, it is the males that more males are produced than females. In other situations, the other way around, which means that the interspecies dynamics are going to be affected. And if some of the species disappear because of the climate change effects, the quality of marine ecosystem and the impact on the populations that depend on healthy marine ecosystems are also going to be affected. So the way that we are trying to uh, talk about the gender aspects of Agenda 2030 is to show those interconnections between trying to look at it from the ecosystem point of view. So that was about the scientific literature, and then you would think that at least at UN agencies, gender equality would be recognized in terms of efforts on SDGs across all the different agencies, but actually the gender equality is recognized definitely with SDG 5. There's reports on SDG 5 have a big content of on gender equality, but the reports on other SDGs don't have this. And in fact, those SDGs that lack the literature on SDGs and lack indicators are the ones that actually also are affected in the way that the UN reports are produced. And the way the UN reports are produced is, of course, they contract experts to write those reports for them. So the experts go to the literature or consult other experts, and so it's like a vicious circle. Yes, unless you tackle gaps in knowledge in the scientific literature and you improve the statistical data and indicators, that gaps and biases in knowledge are going to be reproduced across all the sources of information. So here's an example of a study that invited 150 experts to try, and experts on this kind of a more system level models. And they looked at a great number of those models and trying to find out which ones are the most accurate in the way that they would produce the impacts. So identify the benefits and minimize the trade-offs. And interesting results there was that in the different models of this influential interconnections between SDGs, the least included among when people were interlinking different SDGs was SDG 5, which is about women's empowerment, and SDG 10, which is the other kinds of inequalities. And then when you look, why was this? You will see whether invited experts were asked to declare the level of knowledge and expertise they have on gender. On SDG 5, there was this knowledge was missing. Okay, so if there are no gender experts in the assessment of interconnections between SDGs, SDG 5 and gender equality are going to be ignored. So basically, we're going back now to the statement by Antonio Guterres that there is basically a apparent failure to achieve gender equality goals. So this is a very interesting a result from analysis. It comes from the sort of assessment of the progress on all the SDGs. It is done every 2 years. It is a group of scientists and other experts are brought together by the UN. They analyze different sources of information to see how the progress is being made and how people are identifying influences between the SDGs. So they basically, SDGs are seen as influencing other SDGs, or SDGs are seen as being influenced by other SDGs. So the thing to notice here is the for SDG 5 as being the one that's supposed to be influencing other SDGs. And what you can see here, that poverty, hunger, health, there is empowerment of women is seen as will make an influence, but then it has got no influence for almost all other SDGs. Okay. The only interesting thing about it is, so the yellow things are the trade-offs that have to be made, and the blue things are the benefits. Okay, so the only thing that is distinguishing SDG 5 is that there are no trade-offs. So basically, when you want to achieve SDG 5, you don't have to sacrifice anything. Now, but when you compare to SDG 7, you can see that it basically has got impact and influences all other SDGs, a part of the SDG 17, which is the one about cooperation between different organizations and institutions, but there are also quite a considerable trade-offs identified. But anyway, this just shows how much attention has been put so far on SDG 7, and the fact that it is really it's seen as it can influence SDG 5 in a positive way, but SDG 5 itself is not seen as being really influential. So the common way that people do this connections between different SDGs and different targets is there's the 7-point scale that was developed by the International Council for Science. You basically have the 7 conditions, and you just assign. People just agree to assign whether one target is enabling another target, or it's reinforcing the implementations of another target, or is counteracting implementation, or is constraining, and so on. So it's been very, very widely used, and some organizations have developed online platforms, so you can go and try your own ways of seeing whether the way you understand SDGs or targets, whether you can come up with some sort of a mapping, a scoreboard that will show you which targets or which SDGs have to be prioritized for implementation. So this one is from a Stockholm Environment Institute, and this is from the EU JRC Knowledge SDGs. They're fun to use. You have to select the strength of interaction. You also have to put some evidence that on the basis that you have done this. It's all very, very interesting, and you can do it online and invite friends, and it's quite a quite nice thing to do. So here is interconnections that have been done by the Stockholm Environment Institute to try to identify the implementation, SDGs implementation policy for Sweden. So Sweden is interesting because, of course, the Nordic countries are committed to gender equality, believe in gender equality, but also very conscious about security. So there were sort of questions. A number of assumptions and conditions were put into the scenario in which they were looking and identifying interconnections between different targets and SDGs. And the interesting thing to see is that so the size of the bubble is the proportion, the degree of influence, and the color represents the degree of being influenced. And the reason I bring this here is that the six it's like when you do this, you basically capture the political and cultural uh, situation in a country that is decided to choose an SDGs implementation. So in fact, the gender equality, the SDG 5 is represented here, but also as target 16.6, which got to do with peace and security, and also there's energy security here too. So in many senses, one can use this if one is doing this wisely, and one has got experts on gender equality, and there is a policy within the country that supports gender equality as a goal, then the implementation strategy will reflect us, should reflect us. But here we have an example from the EU where in order to promote sound policy coherence for prioritizing SDGs, JRC looked at a whole framework of policies available in the EU that might relate to SDGs implementation. In this report, there are only two brief mentions of the word gender. It's not at all explored. And this is the model that they have used. And of course, this is analyzing the policies. And of course, we are here in the interesting situation that, of course, gender equality is the key core principle of the European Union. And gender mainstreaming is recognized as has to be now done across all the policies and across all the agencies and across all the programs. And yet, the analysis that JRC was conducting produced a report in which gender does not appear. And gender equality, SDG, as the connections between SDGs that can produce gender equality benefits have not been even considered. Okay, and the only way to explain this is that basically there were no gender experts in there. Okay, so the way they were policies were analyzed, they were not really analyzed. Have they included gender mainstreaming as their objective, and have they actually identified gender equality benefits? So this is very interesting because the commitment, the need to mainstream gender across the EU policies is now an official requirement on all the DGs, and DG budget is responsible for allocating basically budgets to gender mainstreaming, and they have been criticized very strongly by independent auditors for not actually doing the job. So what they have done is that they identify 49 programs, and they analyze these 49 programs according to several criteria to see whether they include gender equality objectives, or whether they have the possibility, or whether they recognize that they actually have this responsibility to do it. And out of those, just in green is the ones that actually have promised and will develop gender equality. The one in red were the ones that recognize, that we're talking here at the policy level, the ones that have programs that have the potential to produce gender equality, and all the other ones that could, but nobody's actually looked into it. So, so when one is looking how the EU should go about implementing SDGs, one should really and look at the using policy as the driving force. We are not going to be successful. Women are not going to benefit, and you can see at the policies associated with energy transition and the European Green Deal, all of them are gender blind. But here is an example. There are very rare, but there are some where people actually try to see from a system level what will happen if the focus is on implementing SDG 5. So if we implement SDG 5, what other consequences or benefits will reside? And actually, in this particular study, it showed that if you actually focus on the implementation of SDG 5, you are going to have a many positive influences on other SDGs. But this is a very, very rare example where people actually, instead of ignoring SDG 5, thinking that women are going to be empowered and equality will be achieved if you just implement other SDGs such as SDG 7, that is social science says this is not going to happen, and even in the analysis it's not going to happen. So can we promote gender analysis with interlinkages? We no, sorry, let me rephrase this. What we really need also to look is not just about the interlinkages, but looking at the linkages at the ecosystem level of impact. And here's just example what I mean. Okay, so this is again going to SDG 14, which is about the life underwater. Looking at it from the ecosystem point of view, all the we're trying to see what actually is happening and what between the human interactions with the marine ecosystem. You can see that you can bring together several relevant SDGs. Yes, it is, for example, policy of fishing is that you take the big fish out and leave the small fish in, but actually studies show that big old female fish produce lots of very healthy eggs, and taking them out from their ecosystem is actually affecting negatively how the species survive. And of course, we have the issues of pollution, we have the issues of the using of the resources, we have the problem of farming, and again of the different impact on the quality of water. And looking at this in this way, it's you can see the interconnections and the benefits of looking at implementations of SDGs by looking at both biology and the social and cultural conditions. And here's another one that looks at SDG 15, which is life on land. Obviously, it's all about the agriculture, but the fact that if we look at this from the point of view of the reproduction and success of different species and how the species interact, you can see a much richer picture, and here and many more, and you can connect this to benefit other SDGs. So, for example, the earthworms are absolutely critical to the quality of soil. They are the biggest biomass in soil. They do reproduce sexually, and so if any farming methods that affect this process will mean that the soil quality of soil will degrade, and of course that means that the agricultural conditions will also degrade. And we can look here at the pollinations. There's been a lot of it in the literature and in the media, is that you can improve the quality and quantity of agricultural product if you make sure that actually the pollination process is successful. And here there's a kokum tree in India. It's every bit of this tree has got some benefit for humans, either medical or as food. but it takes 10 years for it to come to a size that you can say whether it's going to be male or female tree. So if you are planting those trees as a farmer, you would want to have some methods to identify some saplings so you can plant enough male and female trees to have a good pollination. So also another way to try to interconnect the different SDGs is to identify gendered words that have not been that appear in across different SDGs and different targets, and the word access connects appears in 32 targets across 14 goals. So in order to understand what access actually means, how it happens, what are the power relations in this context, I could also identify good interconnections for, if not for all the 14 goals, for quite a substantial number of them. So how to improve the methods of analysis? We have these considerations. So there are these 5 specific methodologies that are common in the literature, and one can enrich each one of them by introducing the gender aspects. We can introduce the gender, ensure that there are gender experts always included in the analysis when it relies on expert judgment. We can make sure that we use in the linguistic approaches understanding the gender content of the words that are used. We can definitely improve how researchers report knowledge on SDGs, that they do include consideration of sex and gender. And of course, with the Horizon Europe, hopefully that might improve. The biggest problem is to actually achieve to be able to collect reliable data and construct reliable indicators, and then of course also the models, and each one can be improved in a particular way of including either the gender policies, the gender indicators, the gender sensitive research, the understanding of the meaning of the words from a gender perspective, and the gender experts. And we have proposed in a report for UN Women is that actually these things have to be combined. So one should not just rely on one or two, but try to pull out the best opportunities for gender-sensitive SDGs implementation by taking these 5 methods and trying to go around them until we find that we have actually, where there are gaps, maybe there's another sources of information that could overcome the gaps in our understanding. So we have done quite a bit of work with UN Women. In 2015, when the SDG agenda has been just announced, we had a gender summit in Seoul in South Korea, and we have highlighted the fact that it is necessary to have a gender perspective on this. We have done the analysis of the different dimensions of gender that go into. We have produced a toolkit that targeting researchers to show how they should think about gender when they are tackling SDGs. And we also produced a toolkit for the UN Women officers, how they can make progress. So that's it. Sorry, I've been rushing because I have other commitments, but anyway, thank you for this opportunity.